Good evening, everyone. Hi. Thank you all for taking time out of your Wednesday evening to join us for this important discussion. I'm Kim Stevenson, one of the founding members of Friends for Equity in Avon Schools, along with Carrie Firestone, Jamie Polhamus, Keisha Smith, Annie Simpson, Chris Campbell, and Julie McNeil. Friends for Equity in Avon Schools is a group of Avon parents and residents advocating for an inclusive school culture that welcomes diversity and values racial equity through connection, education, and community collaboration. We formed in the fall of 2020 and currently have 240 members and followers. You can learn more about us at avonffe.org, including the personal reasons why each of our founding members are doing this work. As a majority white but diversifying community, we believe it is important for all of us to own our responsibility to educate ourselves about equity and anti-racism, support and act where needed, and serve as role models for our kids. Relevant to today's discussion, the recent National Critical Race Theory, or CRT, debate has given rise to a growing number of parent and other organized groups criticizing, policing, and demanding that teachers' curricula and books be investigated, scrutinized, and in some cases removed from schools and libraries. This is also affecting how teachers are approaching approved curriculum they may have been teaching for years. The Farmington Valley is no exception. Consistent with what we're seeing in other towns across Connecticut and the nation, the anti-CRT, anti-equity, anti-LGBTQ traditionalists are organizing in the Farmington Valley in an effort to counter any progress being made around diversity, equity, and inclusion in our communities and schools. They're equating CRT with DEI efforts and are calling it divisive, harmful to white children, racist, communist, Marxist, and unconstitutional. They are organized and at the national level have created playbooks so everyone is working from a consistent message, and it's working. This event will speak to the concerns of educators, authors, and others who are feeling targeted and uncomfortable with this hostile rhetoric and actions. Our state leaders will discuss these issues, provide information about what to do if you are targeted, and how we can all help build a united front to support educators, students, curricula, and books. We also want our educators to know that many parents and community members are deeply concerned about what is going on. We are here to support our amazing teachers, educators, authors, and librarians in any way we can. And we want to make sure we are supporting and building environments that make suburban communities attractive to retaining and hiring students of color and others that bring diverse perspectives and provide needed role models for all of our students. With that backdrop, I'd like to introduce our panelists this evening. They are some of the most qualified leaders in our state to address these issues. Kate Diaz is president of the Connecticut Education Association. William Tong, Attorney General for the state of Connecticut. And I know that he is trying to get on, so hopefully he'll be here in a minute or two. Eleni Kavros DeGraw, State Representative for Avon and Canton. Carrie Firestone is a local author and community leader and founding member of Friends for Equity in Avon Schools and will be moderating our panel today. We are honored to have you all here today. We are deeply appreciative of your leadership on these critical issues for our teachers, for our students who are our future leaders, and for our democracy. Before handing things over, a few housekeeping messages. This panel is being recorded and will be available on the Friends for Equity website for folks who are unable to attend. We will not be holding live Q&A. We've collected questions in advance for the panelists. With that, I'd like to hand the baton over to Carrie Firestone and our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim, and thank you for everything you've been doing for years with regard to this issue. Friends for Equity has been very dynamic, and we're getting a lot of work done, and it's much because of Kim and all of your hard work. So thank you so much all for being here. As Kim said, my name is Carrie Firestone, and I'm a proud member of Avon Friends for Equity, but I'm also a proud member of the SCBWI. For those of you who don't know what SCBWI stands for, it took me many years to remember that it stands for the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. And I feel like as a moderator, I have a unique position here because not only did I work in libraries in my early years, but I was an American history and government teacher in the New York City public schools before becoming an author of middle grade and young adult literature. So I feel like all of my worlds are colliding here, and I wish they were colliding in a good way, but we have a lot of work to do here. And I will say, you know, after all these years of being in this world, I have never seen what I'm seeing now, and it's very concerning to me. We always had, you know, parents who might have had concerns about what was being taught, or as an author, we would have book banning week where often the books would be classics, you know, always To Kill a Mockingbird and, you know, Mark Twain and Harry Potter because of witchcraft, things like that. But it was mostly classics. And the thing I'm seeing now is really concerning because it feels like there's an organized and calculated effort to silence authors of color, LGBTQ authors, Jewish, Muslim, Asian, and other immigrant authors. And I feel like we're seeing a push to silence our American history. So teachers are feeling pressure to kind of change history itself, which is really disturbing to me. And the consequences are pretty dire. And I'm just going to read a quote from Angie Thomas, who wrote a book called The Hate U Give. She writes in a tweet, "It's emotionally taxing to have my books banned, but not because they're my books, because all I can think about is the message it sends to the Black kids who see themselves in my books. They deserve to have their stories told, whether it makes you comfortable or not." And to me, that's the heart of this conversation. And I'll say one more book that really made me realize the situation we're in now, and that is there's a book called All Are Welcome Here. And I know Eleni, Eleni has a copy of it. It's a beautiful book about welcoming immigrants to our country. And I remember our group, Forward Connecticut, gave copies of it to a new family that had come from Yemen. The dad had been killed in the war, and the mom was coming with 6 children, and they were just so happy to receive this book. And months later, the woman who introduced us to the family sent me a beautiful drawing that one of the children had done, kind of copying the illustrations of this book. So when I saw this book on one of the banned lists, I realized we're in trouble here and that we have to have conversations. So really, we're here tonight to talk about how we can confront all of this together. And there's a lot, because we're talking about this, you know, CRT curriculum stuff. We're talking about books. We're talking about librarians being targeted and called out and ordered to remove books from public libraries, from school libraries. But it's all kind of rooted in the same thing. And it's, you know, and really it's a pervasive problem now. And so that's where we'll start. So I'd like to thank our panelists so much. Is Attorney General Tong here yet? Okay, so we're gonna go straight to our other 2 wonderful panelists first. And I'd like to start with you, Representative Kavros-DeGraw, who I will call Eleni, because little known fact, Eleni and I go way back, but Eleni is also a young adult writer and member of the SCBWI. And before she was our state representative, she was part of our writers critique group. So she's also a part of this world. So Eleni, I'm gonna start with these, what they're calling CRT laws that are happening all across the country. And there are laws, there are executive orders.
Carrie, I'm going to interrupt you. Do you want to wait? Because I see that William is joining us.
Oh, sure, okay.
I just wanted to let
Thank
him
you.
go first. So
I'll collect myself that all are welcome here got me.
Oh, I'm
Emotional.
sorry.
it's okay, Attorney General. We have all been having the same issues all day.
I
think
was-
it's Zoom.
I am on my wife's work laptop.
All
So-
right.
Please don't get her in trouble for me using her work laptop, but I've been trying my phone and my work laptop, and I apologize for the disruption.
That's okay. This is the world we're in, right? I mean, we all have these issues. I just want to say thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And just a quick recap, we've just basically been introducing the issue, which is this convergence of book banning and CRT, laws, and the fact that it's sort of all coming together in the classroom, in the library, and what Kim said, and what I will say before getting into our conversation is, teachers are feeling nervous and scared and uncomfortable about what's happening here, but so are parents, so are students, so are librarians, so are authors. So I feel like it's spreading and it's getting more toxic as we move forward in time. So what I was going to do first, and I'll let you just get settled in. Should we call you Attorney General Tong or William?
Whatever you want. William's fine.
We'll go first names. We're all friends here. I'm going to start with Eleni. And by the way, Eleni, thank you, because I know you've been working very hard all day. And thank you for stepping out of your legislative work to be here right now. I'm going to read just a few things that are happening in other states, and then we'll go with the question. In Florida, Governor DeSantis was one of the first to issue an anti-CRT edict forbidding CRT and any other instructional material that distorts historical events, as well as banning the 1619 Project. Now, two bills aim to ban anything that makes students feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress. Florida's legislature is also contemplating what has become known as the Don't Say Gay bill, which bars schools from encouraging classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity. And so these two things converging are really what we're seeing on the author side, which is our colleagues who are either people of color or LGBTQ, or their characters are the ones who are getting slammed right now. These are the people who are really feeling it. The second one is actually Montana. Montana has in many ways bypassed these issues thanks to a state attorney general binding opinion issued in May of last year that critical race theory and certain other anti-racism programs are discriminatory and violate the state and US constitutions as well as civil rights law. So this is where, and you may want to speak to this next, William. And then of course, Eleni, your home state of Virginia. One of Glenn Youngkin's first actions as governor this year was to ban CRT via an executive order that forbids schools to require students to adopt or affirm certain ideas about race, ethnicity, sex, or faith. So, and then in addition, 9 states have passed what they're calling CRT laws, which is basically teachers aren't allowed to talk about race. So Eleni, can you just speak to this kind of generally and let us know if there's anything like this in the mix in Connecticut that we should be thinking about or concerned about?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me, and to all of the teachers and the administrators and the Board of Ed members that are on the call tonight. I really appreciate that you've taken the time in the evening to come do this, because the overwhelming challenges that you've faced in the last 2 years teaching during the pandemic, and I see and I'm just going to apologize in advance. I see some of my son's teachers on the call. Um, we're doing the best we can, I swear. But I really, I feel for the position that you've been in the last 2 years, whether it's your safety or, just generally speaking, the stress of dealing with so many more issues than when you went into teaching, that have been just left on your doorstep. And so I just want to start with that gratitude that you're coming here tonight for even more edification. And I would say, to answer the question, so last year we did see an amendment filed, and it used similar language to what you're talking about. It was a Senate amendment. It was proposed by a senator, and it doesn't sound so bad on its face. It's an act concerning equity and opportunity in state government. That was what it was being attached to. But it was the same kinds of things that you're talking about, the language, no curriculum developed and adopted by the State Board of Education, Department of Education, or any local regional board of education, or taught in any school in this state after the effective date shall include the teaching of divisive concepts, what you saw in other states, to students in grades kindergarten through 12th grade. Any such adopted curriculum shall prohibit making any individual feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of the individual's race or sex. So, and it goes on. It was a pretty decently long amendment, and it's one of the things towards the bottom, that race or sex scapegoating means assigning fault, blame, or bias to a race or sex, or to members of a race or sex because of the individual's race or sex, and similarly encompasses any claim that any particular race or sex is responsible for society's ills. It's a mouthful, to say the least. The point is that, this is where, unfortunately, elections matter. If being able to teach what you want to teach is important to you, if being able to talk about the civil rights movement and actually talk about race, because I'm not really sure how else you would talk about slavery or how you would talk about civil rights if you were not including race. I think that when you consider, as far as the LGBTQ question, when you consider that children are coming out younger, they're coming to teachers, because that's a lot of times kids' safe space, as all the teachers on the call and the administrators know, it's their safe space. Sometimes home is not their safe space, unfortunately. So I think that, while we are not seeing the dearth of things that you're seeing in other states, a lot of that has to do with who would allow those bills to come forward and who wouldn't. So I wish it weren't political. I wish we could all just agree that, history is history. But we've even seen, in some towns, people switch their political affiliation because they're so offended by the concept of not being able to teach history. We have a gentleman who's now serving on the Board of Ed in Canton who switched because his grandchildren are in the school district and he wants them to learn history. So I think that we are going to see more of it. If we don't see it at the state level, you'll definitely see it at the Board of Ed level. We were starting to see things about books prior to the pandemic. I believe our librarians are seeing the same thing. And to the point about, teaching and these books and banned books, I, in some ways, I guess, was radicalized by my 6th grade teacher, Mr. Wilfinger, who read us Fahrenheit 451. It remains my favorite book to this day. And I think that it's, look no further than to these concepts that we learn as we go through school to really solidify who we become as people. Yes, our families matter. Yes, our faith traditions matter if you have one. But, I think we underestimate the value of who our children are spending 8+ hours a day with and their influence. And so I do understand parent concern, but we need to be able to teach history.
Well, thank you. And I will attest, rarely a week goes by that you don't quote that book to me.
Blame Bob Wilfinger.
So, William, do you have something to add to this?
Yeah, so yeah. I have a lot to say, and we all have a lot to say and have very strong feelings about all of these issues. Let me say, first of all, to all the teachers and administrators on this Zoom, thank you. It is hard to conceive of more frontline workers than all of you. And I hope that all of you are safe and healthy, and your families too. You have taken extraordinary risk for all of us and our children. My 3 children right there, those are their birth announcements. And I'm very grateful for all of you and all that you do. You know, my general view about all of this stuff is that we have to be honest about it. It's garbage. And all this talk about CRT, this is a made up controversy by a now out of office president in the middle of a presidential campaign to try to appeal to the worst among us and our basest instincts. And that's all it is. And the idea, and I've made this point a number of times, the idea that race and racism impact every public and private institution in this country is not a new idea. It's not even a controversial idea. It's a fact. You know how I know? Because I learned it in high school. You know, more than 30 years ago. Now, a little more than 30 years ago. And I think we just need to speak these truths and not run from them, and acknowledge truth and science and fact and the scientific method. Now, history is complicated. And I want to share just a quick story about how really complicated it is, because, you know, it doesn't matter what political persuasion or beliefs system that you have. You know, people tend to see things their way, right? And in black and white, stark terms, and none of us are immune from that inclination, right? And so one night, my today 16-year-old, happy birthday, Eleanor, we are at the dinner table, and she made a comment about the former president, that he was a bad guy. And I'm a Democrat. I'm an elected Democratic statewide official, right? I'm a partisan, right? And I said, Eleanor, why do you say that? And she said, well, he's a bad guy. And I said, okay, I hear you. There are things that you don't agree with, and you don't support him, but history is complicated, and people are complicated. And, you know, good guys are good, and history has a lot of guys, by the way. Good guys are good until they're bad, and bad guys are bad until they're good. And I'll give you an example. This week, if you're paying attention, we celebrate the abhorrent anniversary of the signing of the executive order that authorized one of the worst human rights abuses in our country's history on American soil. And that was the internment of more than 125,000 Japanese American citizens in camps on American soil. I am grateful that we teach that history in our schools here across Connecticut. God forbid we don't teach that history, or the history of the Holocaust, or other vital lessons in history and facts that we all must know. But I said to Eleanor, that was a horrible event. And she said, yeah, horrible, one of the worst. And I said, do you know who's responsible for that event? And she said, no. I said, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Oh, I'll even up the ante. You know who's really responsible and never apologized for that event? She said, no, Earl Warren, Chief Justice of the US Supreme Court, the grandfather, the godfather of our civil rights foundation and firmament in this country. When he was Attorney General of the state of California and later governor, thought it was okay to lock up Japanese American citizens in camps because of how they looked. And that's why it's so important to talk about all of this history, right? And to engage all of it, and not paper over and ignore the ugly stuff, because it's ugly all over the place. And that's how we learn that, you know what, separating children from their families at the border more than 80 years later, didn't we make that mistake once before? Let's not do it again. That's what history teaches us. And that's why, you know, I think it's so important that we speak we speak forcefully and push back on a movement that isn't a movement at all. It's a made-up controversy that seeks to obscure the truth of our world.
Thank you. That's a great example, and I hope teachers use that exact example often because it's a good one. I'm going to move to Kate, because Kate, I think you're kind of on the forefront of what's happening in schools. Can you share, first of all, what you're seeing, some of the things you're seeing in schools? I know we anecdotally are hearing across the country from teacher friends that teachers are feeling paranoid. They're feeling like they can't necessarily teach without someone, criticizing or attacking what they're saying. And I'll just share one quick piece from an article that we will include later when we send resources. In New Hampshire, a chapter of an advocacy group that operates in 35 states offered a $500 reward to the first person who successfully caught a teacher violating the state's new law restricting lessons about race and racism in the classroom. How could that go wrong? So can you talk to us about what's happening in classrooms, and then follow up with basically this idea, this balance between how do you, and this is a teacher question, how do we support the need for public education for the good of society while people are calling for increased parental rights in public schools? It's a tough question, but maybe you can start to unpack it.
So thank you for the opportunity to get together and have this dialogue, because I think part of what we're facing is, really a contradiction between what we believe to be true, what we understand, and what's actually happening to us. So, all of this debate that happens, sometimes on TV or even at board meetings or places that feel very distant to many people, are happening directly in the faces of teachers. There is no space between us and the debate. We are the debate. And so it's really intense and it's really stressful. I think there is no coincidence that it's happening in the cusp of this pandemic. I think it's opportunistic. It's sort of striking while the system is challenged already. And we're going to just hammer one more thing. We're going to take these educators who are really stressed to the point of breaking and see if we can absolutely break them. And we're being very successful. We are driving people from the field. We are seeing huge number of people saying, yeah, I don't think I need to do this job anymore. I think the stress of this is unnecessary for me. And I'm a very skilled, thoughtful individual. And why would I say, yes, I would love to be abused on a regular basis? By all means, please come forth and share with me your non-educated, completely uninformed opinion and try and get me fired, because that's what this all translates into, is very personal attacks on people just doing their job. And I always like to remind people that when you look at an educator and you really do look at them, see who they really are. And what they are is a person who chose to dedicate their entire life to caring for other people's children, for saying, I am going to take my family, my personal needs, my personal interests, I'm going to backdoor those, and I'm going to put other people's children as the focus of my day, all day, and most often the night. And we spend a lot of time thinking and caring about these children. So this whole debate really is timed very intentionally to break a system. And it's thoughtful, it's strategic, and it has absolutely attacked people when they're most vulnerable. So when teachers say this makes me feel more anxious and more paranoid and more really attacked, they're right, because they are being attacked more regularly. We have seen Facebook pages just explode with commentary. And we have seen parents take a sentence a teacher says or writes on a piece of paper and isolate that and highlight it as evidence of bias, and really focus in and say these people are going to harm your children, which is so antithetical to the foundation of every single educator. So it is really causing a number of people to question, hey, I'm not really sure this is my dream here anymore. Which, by the way, I also believe is intentional, because if we drive a shortage, we make public education harder to provide. We provide greater allowances and space for other movements to come into play. So I think there's intentionality with a lot of this. And so what our teachers are feeling on the ground level is the response to very intentional attacks. It is designed not to make people from a distance feel uncomfortable, but to make people in those classrooms feel chilled, to feel attacked, and to drive them out of the profession. So make no mistake that is by and large an intentional impact of this effort. So what I have on my hands is a lot of educators who are firmly committed to doing the right thing, even to the point of it maybe causes them some challenges. But there is a firm commitment universally to doing the right thing and to confronting some of these challenges with the truth, with what we really do. And so we focus a lot on, well, it's not about what people think, it's about what's really happening. So let's talk about what education is there for. Let's talk about the design and the intentionality of what we're doing. Teachers don't just show up on a Tuesday and go, hey, let's do this today. You know, there's a lot of thought and preparation and intentionality that goes into what we share with children, and a lot of thought that goes into how is this nurturing them, growing them, creating a citizenry that is more informed than it was yesterday. You know, we have to remember that the foundation of a public education system is to build a level playing field, if you will. The idea, I mean, in its most idyllic sense, we're trying to build a platform that all kids can move forward and succeed on. And as you referenced earlier, that's impossible to do if we don't acknowledge that there's lots of different people with lots of different experiences converging in these communal places. And we do a huge disservice by saying, well, we're not going to talk about those differences. We're not going to acknowledge that differences existed. We're only going to talk about and sanitize. And my personal favorite is when we don't want to talk about things that make people feel distressed or guilt or anguished. And the reason that's my personal favorite is I'm a high school math teacher. And literally everything I do causes distress and anguish. So, you know, that is a fundamental premise of teaching math is kids come at you and go, no, this is hard. So if we take things away that automatically make people feel distressed or anguished, we are intentionally dumbing down our community. You know, part of the learning process is discomfort, and it's part of our process as adults is to be challenged. It's part of our process with students. And it's not my job to tell students what's right or wrong for them to believe, but it is my job to expose them to lots of different ways of thinking so that as they're kind of forming their own personalities, their own opinions, they're not doing it in isolation. They're doing it with the recognition that they live in this global community. And I often find this sort of narrow parameter so interesting because 10 years ago, all we could talk about was global community, global society, global this, global that. And we were working so hard to push our curriculum outward and say, where are we being inclusive? Where are we exposing? As a high school math teacher, the question was, how are you including the global society? And I'm like, I teach the quadratic formula. I don't know, but I'll figure a way to do it. You know, so there was this massive push to recognize that our world was big and kids had to be prepared for this big, giant world. And now, because it's politically desirable, we're saying, oh, no, shrink that world, make that world as small as possible. Because if you make it too big, you might put kids into spaces that they're uncomfortable. And I find that to be such a sad transition. And really not what education is about. It's, you know, the premise of education is to broaden our understanding. And this idea of guilt and shame, we're not imposing by talking about race and equity and different experiences. we're not imposing guilt. You know, I'm not looking at any child in my room and going, any of this is your fault. That's ridiculous. However, if you don't choose to be educated and you don't choose to be, more informed, then could you go down all those same paths? Sure, of course. Fear does that. Lack of information does that. It leads you to places you don't want to go. And so, we often find that kids come to us with all kinds of ideas, and that's great. We explore those. We think about those things with them. We ask them to think critically about their positions, and it's incredibly important that we do that, because that's how they grow. That's how they change and develop. But we've made space for this conversation, and I think there wasn't as much space, and it's all being sort of filtered in this "my child, my choice," to which I would say public education provides a public experience, something that should be reflective of the entire scope of the public. And if you don't want that experience for your child, then maybe public education isn't where they can be, because public education has an obligation to look like the people it serves. And so it's fascinating to me as we start to hear some of the narratives come out where we're not even thinly veiling racism anymore. When you hear some of the dialogues in different spaces where, you hear people say things out loud at Board of Ed meetings, like, well, we don't want those kids here, when you hear conversations about open choice. So I'm not exactly sure when sort of the shame over being racist came kind of shedded off, but that's the world we're in. And so getting educators to a space where they feel safe is a hard job. It's really hard, because people get fired, and they get fired by people who are afraid of fighting these battles. So we need our allies. We need groups like this to come together and say, we're going to create a shield. We're going to support you educators. We're going to speak just as loudly as the people who are coming at you. And we're going to speak as confidently, as convincingly, as regularly. We're going to be as strategic, and we are going to message the heck out of truth matters. And we want kids exposed to a wide variety of experiences so they can be the best they can possibly be, and they can develop and grow. So we need voices, because that's the only way you start to drown out the noise, is to have really intelligent, thoughtful pushback and say, well, I'm not sure what you're saying is accurate. How about if we talk about this? Or how about we actually look at and open the curriculum, as opposed to make assumptions, and maybe read the whole book, not one sentence in it. So I think there's a really important space for our allies in public education to speak loudly and confidently for our educators, because oftentimes it's hard for them. They can't come forward for fear of retaliation or becoming the next Facebook meme that a parent group decides to issue out there. So we need allies. We need parents who want to support us really badly. That's who we need.
Carrie, can I pick
Yes,
up on something that
please.
Kate said? I really appreciate your statement about how we're all about global society and globalism, and now there's an attempt to make the world small again, or to limit it, and that's not even possible, and the world is so much bigger and so interconnected, and that ship sailed a long time ago, and I think the people that it really hurts, I mean, we're here talking about teachers, but I bet the teachers here listening tonight will tell you the people it really hurts are the kids, the students, because they're not getting the full educational experience that they need. They're not learning everything that they need to learn, and we're not preparing them for that world that we recognized, right? That is increasingly global and complex. And if you can't if you can't operate in a diverse space with people from different backgrounds and show them respect and treat them as colleagues and empower them and work together and collaborate, you can't work at any major company in this country. I'm sorry, you just won't make it. Okay. If you have a really limited view of the world and either covertly or overtly act on stereotypes or harbor overt or covert racist feelings towards other people, and you can't build those bridges, you have no chance in the workforce. And that, I think, people don't understand.
Well, and I'll go one step further on that too, because I think not only does it hurt the kids in just sort of their exposure, but it sets them up for a fraudulent experience because kids aren't stupid. You know, they come to us knowing the world is big. They're on TikTok with China.
Yeah, they know.
Okay. They
know.
know. All right. They're watching and they have a very big sense of the world. So when we deny that that's real, or we try and put up a wall and act like it's not happening, then they think we're stupid. And they think the whole experience is a fraud and they write it off and they compartmentalize it as something nonsensical. Because why would I believe that? I go on TikTok every 5 minutes and can find out, you know, whatever. You know, I think parents that are trying to ban books, I always laugh. I'm like, have you looked at your kid's phone?
Well,
Start
let
there.
me interrupt there because I want to move this conversation a little bit in another direction. But I will say, with regard to teaching, I once taught a Holocaust studies class to a class with literally 30 different nations I taught ESL, so 30 nations of students in one room. And so we would have these very passionate conversations, and sometimes verbal fights would erupt between the Pakistani and Indian kids and the Dominican and Puerto Rican kids and then the Chinese and Taiwanese kids. And you know, it was like this little global fire fest of issues. But in the end, we all rallied around one girl who was trying to decide whether to go back to Kashmir and face probable death due to a family issue, you know, family political issue. And these kids all rallied around her and used the tools we had used in, like, you know, becoming a family to convince her to stay. And I'm still in touch with her. She has children. She's here. She decided not to go. It was this beautiful moment. But like the thought of not being able to have those passionate conversations in a safe space is very scary to me, because it's as if we've created this, it's like snowplow parenting to the nth degree, because it's like, instead of allowing our kids to have safe spaces, to have all kinds of feelings and process them, we're trying not to let them have feelings at all. And this is really dangerous.
And make mistakes.
And make, you know, and have thoughts that don't make sense. And, you know, it all needs to happen. But I'm going to move just briefly, because we have writers in the audience as well, to talk about book banning. I see a lot of my colleagues sharing all the time on Twitter about how their books have been banned and more books banned, you know, and it's all there's a racism piece, but it's also very heavily LGBTQ and transphobic people who are really coming down hard on what I see as the most vulnerable among us, right? Our most vulnerable kids are suffering. And I have seen these authors work magic where kids come up to them and say, like, if it weren't for your book, I don't think I'd be here right now. And so to deprive these kids of these books in a safe space is not only sad, it's scary, it's dangerous. So Eleni, I know you've had experiences where people have accused you of supporting pornography and, you know, things like that. So I just wanted you to mention that and what your thoughts are on that. And then maybe, William, you could talk about censorship and First Amendment and what that means, because nobody really understands what censorship is and what the First Amendment protects. So Eleni, you want to just share what
Yeah,
you've
and
experienced here?
a couple things that I wanted to pick up on. One of the first things they tell you, and because we're constantly talking about mental health now, thank God, and because we're constantly talking about, and we're working on this landmark legislation on children's mental health. I mean, one of the first rules of therapy is get comfortable with the uncomfortable, right? So I think that if we really want to disable our children, that's the way to do it, is by just continuing to smooth the water. There was this great book, Gift of Failure, when my kids were little, and if you haven't read it, great book, because I mean, you got to keep letting them fall and learn how to, you pick them up, but also learn how to pick themselves up, those kinds of things. But just last week, I think people are really confused, first of all, at the definition of pornography. There's a very, very specific definition. Last week, I had put up a Facebook post that was honestly about teen dating violence, because February is Teen Dating Violence Month. As most of the people who follow me on Facebook, I try to put as much information out there as possible. I try to be as accessible to my constituents as I possibly can. But I don't respond on Facebook. And the reason I don't is because it's a great place to share information. It's not a great place to have a conversation most of the time, or at least not have a reasonable conversation. And I'm always happy to have these kinds of conversations. But oddly, I was on that post, it started out as will you push pornographic books at the library? Now, I believe the Avon librarian is on tonight, and I believe the Canton one is too. And I'm pretty sure that I'm not responsible for the book list at the library. I love libraries. I love librarians. I think they're amazing. And again, they're like teachers in that they, really are a gift to kids, a gift to adults as well, but really a gift to kids, suggesting books and that sort of thing. But there is an undercurrent, and it is very specifically anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ. Someone went so far as to say about a graphic novel that had been mentioned called Gender Queer, that I was, well, what about the boy on boy sex, which I hadn't heard that phrase in, so long. And it was just a fascinating thing that suddenly there is this narrative that we cannot, we really have to control every single thing. And that goes back to what you were saying about the internet and TikTok and Facebook. I mean, these kids have access to things, and have for over a decade now. They're good. Believe me, one of their lessons, at my daughter's school, I remember it was like, Google your name, Google your parents' name. What if it's out there? If you think you're hiding a secret about your own life from your kids, believe me, they know. So, in terms of, but again, it's being able to have these conversations. These are all teachable moments, whether it's you as a parent having the teachable moment, whether it's the teacher having a teachable moment. That's what the intention of ideas that, maybe it's not an idea that your family believes in, okay? But that doesn't mean there isn't that valuable moment to say, well, in our house, we believe this, or in their house, they believe this. But that's what that's for. And so I think that we are going to see a lot more of these accusations of, I'm being canceled, you're promoting this, you're promoting that. I get a lot of from just a narrow group of people that I really support, the transgenders. There's a lot of calling people outside of their names. There's a lot of, as you were starting to say, they're saying the quiet parts out loud, and there's no shame in it anymore. And as William was saying, this really what I think William was getting at in terms of, you can't succeed if you aren't part of this global society, so to speak. This is a last gasp. At least that's how it feels to me, because there is no stopping the train that faces that look like mine, with white skin and blue eyes and sort of real blonde hair. This is, the world is not going to look like us. We used to take our children into New York City. We used to take our children to Washington, D.C. And I would say to them when they were little, look around. This is what the world looks like. All these people that you see that are speaking different languages, that don't look like you, that don't dress like you, that don't smell like you, that don't have the same features you have, that train has left the station. The majority does not look like this anymore. And I think that not acknowledging that is just, again, it's another way that we are not enabling our children, we're disabling our children. So.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for that. And I'm sorry you get all this stuff, but I know you can take it.
I just, the things that I'm not responsible for, what can I do? So
yeah, it's a lot though sometimes to see as your friend.
You didn't cite the Greek and Turkish students in your class. That would have triggered.
We're not talking about that.
So William, like I said, if you could just define First Amendment rights in
Oh,
censorship.
wow.
I know.
In 20 seconds.
Thing. And then Kate, we're gonna get to solutions after that. And
So-
I'm gonna have you start talking about what teachers can do step by step if something goes down. Okay.
So this is a big area of the law and it's complicated. Let me just say a couple things though that I think people need to keep in mind. First of all, the First Amendment is really about state action. It's almost completely about government action limiting our First Amendment rights to religion, speech, press, assembly, petition. And the core of the First Amendment is political speech, right? You get to stand out in the street corner and say whatever you want about our government or public policy issues, and that is your right. And in general terms, that's your sacred right as an American, that we do not infringe unless, right, you're doing something to harm somebody else, okay? Unless you're doing something to incite violence or something like that. And from a First Amendment perspective, what that means to me is that governments should not be using their powers, right, to ban thoughts that they don't like, right? And using their authority through state action to infringe the First Amendment rights of all of us. And that includes silencing critics, that includes book banning, right? That includes trying to silence unpopular ideas or ideas that don't jive with the people who are making those decisions. The second thing I want to say about the First Amendment in this context is the First Amendment doesn't mean that you can say whatever the hell you want at any time without regard to the consequences, okay? So the First Amendment doesn't mean that you can threaten a teacher. It doesn't, right? It doesn't mean that you can go to a meeting and intimidate them and get in their face and make them fear for their personal safety. It doesn't mean that you can put them at risk and their family at risk by going on social media and ginning up a whole bunch of people in your community to hate them and to intimidate them and assault them. The First Amendment doesn't protect any of that, okay? And I think people think that, well, I have a First Amendment right to be, a total jerk anytime I want to anybody without regard to the consequences. I guess it protects your right to be a jerk, but it doesn't protect your right to, it doesn't give you the right to harm or put other people at risk and cause them to feel like they are in danger and actually injure them. I am going to get a power cord for my wife's computer. So
okay, thank you. That was actually very, very helpful. So Kate, let's move on. Now we're gonna now move to the end of our meetup, which is basically solutions. And what I'm a teacher. I feel like I have a student who keeps going home and telling parents about tattling on my teaching and making me feel paranoid. And then the teachers come in and the parents come in and complain to my administrator about me and want me to be investigated. What is my recourse? Where do I go from here? I feel alone. I don't really have, I'm new, I'm young. I don't have other teachers to go to the teacher's room and start, getting together. Where do I go from here in terms of from a union president perspective?
So I think there's a couple of spaces that it's really important for teachers of all experience levels to understand. And the first place actually you do go is to your union because they're the people who know the rules. They know the rules of engagement. They know where the spaces are. They know how to help. And they know how to support. And we've seen that happen time and time again. Teachers kind of reach out and go, hey, wait a minute. I'm feeling like this is not a good situation for me. And at that moment, it's super important that you go get your advocate, because really that's the function and the role of the union in this space, is to be the advocate for the educator and to ensure that their right to teach is preserved. So I think that is the first kind of turn. And all schools have either a building rep or a local president that is easily accessible, and that they have a right to call upon if they are pulled into, they have with good old fashioned what we call Weingarten rights. And if they are pulled into a meeting and it starts to have a disciplinary flavor to it, or you feel like you're being kind of accused or investigated, you have a right to halt the meeting and request union representation. So teachers need to keep that in mind, that they have a right to have an advocate, that they don't need to go this alone, that, that is their certain, that's what the membership is there for. Because the other side of this is there's power in the number. There's power in the voice. So the community of educators is a space that we seek to support one another, to find ways to say, how are we going to navigate this road with you? Because nobody should be on a road like this by themselves. So it's super important that become kind of the first place. But I also think that we have good advocates with our relationships with our administration. Teachers and administration sometimes aren't on the same page. Not gonna lie, the union president, more than once, we've had to have a little tussle here and there and work things out. But I find on this particular issue, we land in the same space. And so I always tell teachers, this is the moment where you do reach out to your department head, your school principal, and say, listen, I want to engage with this parent in a productive and meaningful way, because we all do. We don't shy away from parent conversations, but we don't want is an abusive conversation. We want a productive, meaningful conversation that's really centrally focused on how do we support students and their growth. And so it's really important that we have the ability to have that conversation with our administrative leadership and say, listen, can we powwow before we have this meeting? We need to have a pre-conversation that brings us all into this space the same way. The more difficult the conversation is, the more important it is to pre-think that meeting and not just jump in. I think we want to know and to think about, okay, how are we approaching this issue? Is there space where we should be apologizing? Let's be reflective practitioners. Did we do things the way we meant to, or did we have missteps, and do we own those? And how do we move out from those places? So I think the fear comes from the persecution of a mistake. A lot of our educators are white and not necessarily with a lifetime of experience about talking about race. And they want to. I mean, I'm going to be 50 next week. It's my birthday. And I will tell you that for the first probably 35 years of my life, I didn't probably have a whole lot of explicit conversations about race. As a white middle-class woman, there wasn't really any need in my world. If things came up, we talked about it, in college, I had those conversations as sort of, I saw the world getting bigger and I wanted to understand it, but I never talked about being white because white was just sort of assumed, that was kind of what it was. So having explicit conversations about race for some of us is new. I talked to my students who, an 18-year-old Black man, and he's been having conversations about race since he could talk. And so I had to kind of get into this in a way that said, okay, what is it that I don't know and how do I learn so that I can be a better advocate for my students and that I can be a better teacher so that I understand who they are. So we're not averse to learning as educators. We want to get it right. We want to learn from parents, but what we don't want is silencing. I think universally, when anybody comes in and is trying to silence the voice of anyone, that's kind of an affront to our educational process, where we're like, oh, this is not comfortable when you're trying to silence viewpoints, because it has this air of control. I need to control every narrative. And that's just not possible. As we've alluded to and spoken to speak directly, students are coming at us with very big worlds and a vast understanding, oftentimes things that maybe we didn't know they would even have been exposed to, but they have. So we have to work within their world and help them to understand the world. Because the problem is, if we aren't having conversations about some of the difficult things, we really rob our kids from an opportunity from understanding and setting their own moral compass. I don't need to set a child's moral compass. That is not my job. It is the family's role, but it's my job to support a kid to grow and to develop their own, to ask good questions, and to ensure that there's space for them to ask good questions, and to be able to kind of help them think, you know, have you talked about X, Y, and Z? I'm very worried about our LGBTQ community. Those kids are vulnerable, and we've had a lot of opportunities. Certainly I have, as an educator, to learn from my LGBTQ students, for them to help me to understand how I can help them. And to rob me of the opportunity of that is just criminal. You know, it's just criminal because it makes somebody uncomfortable. These are people who exist in our world. We want to understand each other. And it's not about them needing my consent to live a lifestyle, right? That's not what this is about. Families are going to come up with their own rules of engagement. It's about saying, you don't need my consent. You need to know that wherever and whoever you are is welcome here. And that's what we're going to work with. So, you know, I hope that teachers know that they aren't alone. Our union works really strongly to try and stand with our teachers and to pave the way with our administrators to say we want to have good conversations that allow for growth. But it can be scary. And so I would always say to the teacher, have your advocate. Have them. Make sure that you feel that somebody is on, you know, protecting you in this conversation as well. But also be willing to grow in the conversation, recognizing that, you know, you're going to learn things along the way too. The first transgender student I had, I'm sure I was imperfect with managing. I am certain that I said incorrect pronouns. I may have said things along the way that I now go, oh my goodness, I can't believe you said that. But I learned, because when you learn and you know more, you do better. And so I'm much more adept with that and much more confident and able to be a better teacher because of it. And so, you know, we're not afraid of growing. What we're afraid of is, you know, being attacked for our growing. And I think that's where, you know, we really need to embrace that education mindset of, we're going to have to work hard to get better and stronger. And that makes our communities better and stronger. It makes our economy better and stronger. It literally makes everything better. So to fight that growth, to fight that change has, I think, really dire consequences.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope educators on the call understand like that there is a path, that you don't have to do anything alone. And this is a good opportunity now to, Christy, if you can put up, or Jamie, put up the graphic of kind of next steps, because one of them is to build your group of allies. So you're teaching what you need to teach, you're teaching the curriculum, you're teaching the way you teach, and you have support. And so just a quick takeaway before we finish up, and that is some of the things you can do. Number one, we didn't really talk about this, but this is probably the most important thing, and that is to attend your local Board of Education meetings regularly. Be present, be active, understand what's going on, and be ready to participate if you need to in your community. It's really all kind of converging at that level. Join local groups like Friends for Equity and Avon Schools. We are here as a resource for other communities who might want to find out how we're structuring our organization. And we have a growing group of people who are supporting our initiatives. For librarians, there's a new organization called Freedom, and it's freedom.us, the website, but also on Twitter, it's #freedom, READOM, and it's basically librarians who are coming together to bolster their own, to support each other with regard to how people are coming into libraries and trying to have books challenged at the library level. It's really well organized, and I recommend everyone take a look at the Freedom hashtag on Twitter. And, you know, as an author to other people who are writing books, I would like to just encourage you to write the story. Don't think about what people are going to think. Don't think about how, oh, someone's not going to like this. Someone's not going to like this. Yeah, people are going to challenge you probably, but I will tell you that no matter what you write, you're going to have people not liking the book. I had to learn that a long time ago, and it's a painful thing as an artist, but that's life. Write the story you need to write, and write stories that provide voices for the unheard people in our society. You know, and I think it's finally publishing, thanks to, and I'll, if we go down and look at We Need Diverse Books, thanks to We Need Diverse Books, the publishing world is finally publishing books by underrepresented and previously never represented authors. And that is a very exciting thing, and awards are recognizing these books. So the fact that these are being challenged right now is really frustrating, but that's okay. Push through it and keep writing your stories. Check out books by diverse authors at your local library, all kinds of diverse authors. And I know our Avon Library has great displays of books by all kinds of authors. And then the buy and share books by diverse authors is interesting, because we have these books that are banned, and then you have people like us who feel bad and we want to buy a bunch of books because we want to support the authors. And that's wonderful. But like what Angie Thomas said in her tweet, if these books aren't getting into the hands of kids in schools, often these kids do not have access to these books. And so kids are not seeing themselves on the page because, you know, they need school librarians to hand them these books and show them themselves on the page. So in addition to buying books by diverse authors, especially books that are being challenged or banned, take those books and find a way to get them in the hands of kids who need to see those stories. And there's lots of opportunities to do that, but don't just stick it on your shelf because you're trying to support somebody. Stick it on the shelf of a kid who needs to see himself or herself. Speak out on social media about these issues. And then we've included some really helpful websites that include all the stuff we've been talking about. It's a lot, but also, so support our schools, the ACLU, We Need Diverse Books, the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. The Zinn Education Project has lots of stuff about teaching history. And then the National Coalition Against Censorship has like a ton of groups to follow. And so all of these are really great resources. But I would just encourage us all to stay together and to continue having conversations, whether they be tough conversations or supportive conversations, because that's how we get through this wave of, you know, ugliness. And I think anyone who studied history knows that these waves come and they're ugly, and we push through them and we get to the next level of understanding and healing. So, you know, but we need to work to get there. So do any of the panelists have anything to add to this?
I just want to give a couple wrap up comments. I mean, I think that, first of all, union representation is critical. I know that the teachers unions get really beat up nationally. Unions in general get beat up, but you know, you've got to remember that whether, you know, that's who's on the ground, that's who's there for you. It's really important, you know, as we're talking about writers sharing stories and everything else, you educators, librarians, sharing stories with people like me, sharing stories with your friends who can attend those board meetings when you don't feel comfortable standing up at the board meeting and sharing what your experience is. You know, it's important that your friends are there to speak up. You know, a lot of times Board of Ed meetings can be very one-sided, in the same way that some of our public hearings that we have at the state level can be really one-sided. If you're not comfortable submitting public testimony when things come up at the state level, you can always email or call me or whoever your representative is to have that conversation, because it really does improve our legislating if we know what's going on the ground. And, you know, most, I would say the majority of us, the majority of my colleagues, we want to hear from people because we can't work in a vacuum. So I really would highly encourage you to do that. Make sure you're taking care of yourselves. I'm thinking about just how hard this process has been. And like she was sharing before, you know, this is one more thing that undermines public education. And so I think that, you know, I'm so grateful to the Friends group because this is not the first conversation we've had. There was a wonderful CRT conversation last fall, moderated by Martha Brackeen Harris, who I knew from my girls' school many years ago. And, you know,
It was my
these are the-
fifth grade teacher.
yeah, I was going to say, I know William knows her, but you know, these are the kinds of conversations that we have to keep having because we need you to know that we are here for you. We also need parents who are experiencing things in the classroom to know that we're here for them, that we can support teachers with those issues, that we can support parents. So I just hope that what you're taking away from tonight is that you're not alone and that there are ways to move forward and to be supported. And in any way that I can do that, and I'm sure everyone else on the call feels the same way, you know, please do not hesitate to reach out.
I would just add, I think Kate made another really important point, which is we're all doing this together. The world is changing so fast. It's so disrupted, you know, it changes every 7 minutes, it feels like. And I think sometimes people who don't agree with us think that we think we're perfect and that we're trying to impose on them you know, a view of the world that they don't share and that they're somehow bad or wrong. And that's not it at all. It's really understanding that this is a process for all of us. And I just wanted to share that when I went to the legislature in 2007, we were still debating marriage equality. And we were still trying to figure out what that is and why wasn't civil unions good enough? And what does marriage equality mean and how do we get there? And we were struggling alongside the two gay men who led the committee that I would later lead in my legislative career, the Judiciary Committee, Mike Lawler and Andrew McDonald. And then that was hard. That was really hard. And then we passed the first in the nation transgender rights, civil rights law. And I was on the Judiciary Committee. But let me tell you, that was hard for a lot of us, right? Progressives too, to understand where people are coming from, to understand gender dysphoria, right? It's not just about pronouns, right, Kate? It's about understanding people and who they are and how they were born, right? And why they don't have a choice, right? It's not a lifestyle. And I just want to say, I've made a ton of mistakes. I have said things, I am sure I have done things that I'm horrified, like you, Kate, that I said or did. But I'm grateful that I have had the opportunity, not just in my academic experience, but in my professional life, I've had the opportunity to make mistakes and to learn and to grow. And that's what we're asking everyone to do, and just embrace that process. So thank you for having me tonight.
And I would just add that, you know, for educators, the goal is very, you know, it's very simple. We want the opportunity to teach our students. We want the opportunity to explore a curriculum that's rich and inviting and inspiring and challenging. And if there are times where we need to have conversations about our practice, because maybe we had a misstep or something was unclear, let's have those conversations. Let's do those things. Let's not be afraid of them. Let's come to the table and share and grow. Because honestly, if the end game is that I'm a better teacher and I serve my students better, and I'm more skilled and more informed, and my students are more informed, how is that a bad outcome? So, you know, that's a great outcome. And so, you know, I love the idea that even among great conflict, there's a commonality to wanting good things. We may not always agree on how we get there. And we're gonna duke that out, but to be kind of focused on the end game, which is really to develop minds and hearts and to grow people. I mean, I think there's a lot of space for us to come to the table on that and have really good conversations. And some maybe walk away sometimes agreeing to disagree. I can't say that won't happen, but there's a lot of room, but we have to be willing to hear each other. And I think that's one of the frightening components, is if we feel like there's no room to be heard. And so I think whatever we can do to build the advocacy groups, to make space to hear each other, it's really powerful to do, and to really understand that silence is deafening in this case, that if you're not saying something, another voice will fill that void. And so you can't silently support education. That's not possible right now. That's just not the space we live in. You have to be a vocal supporter of educators and a visible supporter of public education. Sitting at home and going, gosh, that sucks, isn't going to be enough. We need people out there with as much enthusiasm for education as the people who are pushing down on it.
Well said. Well, I would just like to say thank you to all our panelists, to Kate, to Eleni, to William, for this really meaningful conversation. We have many more conversations to come, and let's just keep going. And what I say to viewers is keep reading, keep writing, keep teaching, keep caring about young people, and keep being brave. We need you all right now, and we're with you. So thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.